This is Jason. We are reading Where is the Empire State Building? Chapter 1 to Chapter 3. I hope you like it and subscribe, and let's start. Where is the Empire State Building? In 1929, there was a race for the sky in New York City. Two new skyscrapers were going up, the Chrysler Building and the Manhattan Company Building. Each owner wanted his building to be the tallest in the world, but neither man knew exactly what height the other was aiming for. The owner of the Manhattan Company managed to discover the plans for the Chrysler Building. Immediately, he changed his plans so that his buildings would be taller. So in April 1930, the Manhattan Company Building became the tallest in the world, but only for a few weeks. Secretly, the crew of the Chrysler Building was creating a tall spire. All the world took place inside the unfinished building, so no one knew about it. When the spire, 125 feet high, was finished, it was lifted up through a hole in the roof. Suddenly, the tallest building in the world was the Chrysler Building. With its spire, it was 1,046 feet tall. What neither company knew was that a third group of builders was watching them both closely. Their building was already designed, but they were waiting until the Chrysler Building was finished before making their plans final. However tall the Chrysler Building was, they planned to make sure their building was a little taller. This new skyscraper was the Empire State Building. It stands in the heart of New York City, with its front entrance on 5th Avenue below 34th Street. It is 102 stories high and 1,250 feet tall, 1,450 feet if you count the antenna on top, which was added later. Decorated with aluminium and stainless steel, it soars above other nearby skyscrapers, gleaming in the sun. For 40 years longer than any other building, it held the title of the world's tallest building. Today, most people no longer even know what the world's tallest building is, but everyone still knows the Empire State Building. It is one of the world's best-loved buildings. An average of 10,000 people from all over the world visit it every day. People everywhere recognize it from movies, pictures, and advertisements. For most people, it symbolizes New York City. Chapter 1. From Farm to Skyscraper. Only 100 years before the Empire State Building started, the spot where it would stand was still countryside in Manhattan in 1827. William Astor bought a little farm there with a peaceful stream running through it. Astor was one of the richest businessmen in America. One way he made money was by buying cheap land that he guessed would be soon worth a lot. He was sure New York City would grow quickly. To surround his farm, he was right. By the 1850s, the area had become a fashionable neighborhood. William Astor's two sons built themselves mansions on the lot, and the Astor family moved up to 34th Street. Their move turned the area into a center of power and wealth. It has stayed so ever since. By the 1890s, the branches of the Astor family living in the two mansions were fighting. Each Miss Astor thought that she should be the most important lady in the family. They both wanted to be known as the Miss Astor. The newspapers loved reporting on this battle. Things got so bad that William Wardolph Astor and his wife moved away. He built a hotel where his house had stood. He did this to spite Caroline Astor, his aunt, who lived in the other house. The tall hotel blocked her sunlight, and he knew she would hate travelers coming and going right next to her. Caroline did indeed hate the Waldorf Hotel. Soon after it opened, she moved. Her son turned the site of her mansion into another hotel, the Astoria. Before long, the two warring hotels were joined together to create one huge, fancy place, the Waldorf Astoria Hotel. It was opened. It was the world's largest hotel in Peacock Alley. The long hall that joined the two buildings, upper-class New Yorkers and visitors strolled along in elegant clothes and jewels showing off. The city continued growing. However, soon business began moving into the area. Poor people came to work in small factories. Machines created smoke and dirt. The area was no longer so upper class. By 1928, it was time for the Waldorf Astoria to move to a better neighborhood. The land where it stood was worth a lot of money. It took up almost the whole city block. By now, it was nearly impossible to buy a lot that big in the middle of New York. The Waldorf Astoria was sold for about $16 million. This was the biggest real estate sale of the year. By then, everyone was constructing tall buildings where William Astor's farm once stood. There would be a skyscraper. Chapter 2. How to build a tall building. Throughout history, whenever a better method of construction was invented, buildings became taller. The earliest builders used a post and lintel system. Two posts stand upright. A stone called a lintel is balanced across the top of them. Stonehenge in England is one good example. The posts have to stand fairly close together, because a lintel couldn't be made too long. It would just crack down the middle. This limited the size of buildings. The ancient Romans were able to build much higher by using arches. An arch could hold up a lot of weight. In fact, the more weight was piled on it, the stronger it became. The cathedral builders of the Middle Ages invented several new forms of arches. They used them to create huge cathedrals that soared skywards. However, arches only work for big open space. Huge buildings had to be mostly empty inside. It wasn't possible to make tall buildings with lots of different floors. If floors ran all the way across the space, they would collapse. In modern cities, buildings with many stories were needed. Until the 1880s, buildings could be 10 stories high at the most. All the weight of a building was held up by the bottom of the outside walls. So the taller a building got, the thicker the walls had to be. Eventually, the walls would have to be so thick that there would be no floor space left. In the 1850s, people started to build walls on an open framework. To cast iron. Iron was stronger than wood or stone. In a cast iron building, the walls looked like a cage of iron columns and arches. This framework holds up at the weight of a building. The wall covering the frame is called a curtain wall because it hangs from the frame like a curtain. All it has to do is block out wind and water. It doesn't have to carry any weight. That means it can be made very thin and light. The curtain wall is like the skin on a body. The iron framework is the skeleton that holds everything in shape. It was easier and cheaper to build tall cast iron buildings than tall stone buildings. The height of the building didn't affect the thickness of the walls. However, even using cast iron, it still wasn't possible to build skyscrapers. The tallest cast iron buildings were only 10 or 11 stories high, not much taller than stone buildings. Iron was brittle. When it got much taller than 10 stories, the iron framework might crack. If builders used steel instead of iron, they could make the framework as tall as they wanted. Steel is iron combined with carbon and other elements. It is much stronger than iron. It is also more flexible, so it doesn't break as easily. Unfortunately, making steel was too slow and expensive. No one knew a good way to make pieces large enough for a tall building. That changed in 1855. An English inventor named Henry Bessemer figured out a quick and easy way to make large steel beams. Bessemer's beams didn't cost much more than iron beams. Suddenly, there was almost no limit on how tall a building could be. A new name was invented for tall buildings: skyscrapers. New Yorkers hate to admit it, but the first real skyscraper was not built in New York City. It was the Home Insurance Building in Chicago, finished in 1885. In New York, people were slow to welcome skyscrapers. They seemed too tall and too dangerous. What if they blew over a high wind? One of the city's earliest steel-frame skyscrapers was the Tower Building. It was torn down in 1913. Begun in 1888, it was 11 stories high. To convince people it was safe, the architect climbed all the way to the top of the framework during a storm. Then he dropped the line with a weight on it. Down the middle, the line didn't swing back and forth. This proved that the building would stand up to the winds outside. People soon came to trust the new steel skeleton. In 1883, the famous Brooklyn Bridge opened in New York. Everyone felt safe crossing it because it was held up by huge solid stone towers. By 1901, building had started on the Manhattan Bridge a little farther north. This bridge had steel towers, not stone. The builders originally thought they might cover the steel framework with granite to make the towers look like they were built of stone, but they didn't have to. By now, people believed in the strength of steel towers. Chapter 3. Up and Up. Using steel, it was possible to construct a building 25 stories high. But who would want to use such a building? No one would want to walk up all those stairs every day. First, builders needed a practical elevator. Elevators had been around for a while, but people didn't think they were safe enough to carry people in tall buildings. What if the cable holding the elevator broke? The people inside would fall hundreds of feet to their death. In 1852, Elisha Otis invented a solution: the safety elevator. At the 1854 World's Fair in New York, he climbed into an elevator in front of a crowd of people. Then he cut right through the cable. The elevator feet only a few feet before his safety device stopped it. People were convinced, and architects began putting down elevators into the buildings. Elevators wouldn't work for tall skyscrapers, though. They were too slow. No one wanted to wait 10 or 15 minutes to get up to the 25th floor. So in 1878, Otis came up with an elevator that could travel 8 stories in less than a minute. His inventions made skyscrapers practical. Otis is still the world's largest elevator maker. If you look at the floor when you get into an elevator, chances are it will say Otis. Space is very valuable in New York. Owners want to use as much of their lot as possible. Even before skyscrapers, this meant that many streets were solid blocks of stone from end to end. There was no space between one building and the next. This hadn't really mattered when the buildings were short. But now skyscrapers were springing up everywhere. By 1929, there were 188 buildings in New York that were over 20 stories high. This led to a new problem. Imagine an unbroken line of buildings, all skyscrapers 20 stories tall. The sun would never reach the streets. They would become deep gullies, where howling winds would knock down anyone who tried to walk in them. To prevent this, in 1916, New York City created the first nation's first zoning laws. The law said that after a building reached a certain height, it had to have a step in it. So high, it had to have a setback in it. So the building got small. As it got small, it had to keep adding setbacks. So as the building rose, it had to get thinner and narrower. Setbacks made sure that sun shone would reach the streets and there would be sky between tall towers. At any point, the builder could stop using setbacks and build a tower. Then there was no limit on how high the tower could be. However, it could be no bigger around than 1/4 of the building slot. Much architect wanted buildings they could be proud of, so they experimented in ways to arrange setbacks that were interesting to look at. They topped their buildings with towers like church steeples. In 1916, zoning laws created the famous New York skyline we know today. City of pyramids, towers, and soaring spires. That's all today, thank you. I hope you like it, and subscribe. And next time, we are going to read Where is the Empire State Building, Chapter 3 to Chapter 6. I hope you like it.